Okay, I read this article by Matilal called A Critique of the Madhyamaka Position, which is in this book called The Problem of the Two Truths in Buddhism and Vedanta. So there was a lot to say about this article, but I will keep it short in the interest of moving on to other things as soon as possible. And I found some things that were quite, Matilal made some statements that were quite different than the types that we might get UVA, and some that were somewhat similar. So I've given...
Say that again, please.
I said some of Matilал's statements about Madhyamaka were quite different than those we get at UVA, and some were similar. So I've included some of each. And this is also...
So you might say made by that...
Made by...
That Hopkins lineage at UVA, how the Hopkins lineage characterizes Gelugpa positions.
Right.
Right?
That's fine.
We have no position of our own. Which means we're stupid. Gets out like that after a while.
So I made a note at the top that Matilal's article discusses only Indian Madhyamaka, and so he doesn't refer to Tsongkhapa at all. So I think that's good to start out knowing. And these are also things that we've all seen before in most of your other presentations, so this one will be most exciting of
Francis, can you speak a little more loudly?
I can. You could also move a little bit closer. The first point I wanted to make is that Matilal sees Madhyamaka as a critique of other systems and of all views, which is something that Napper points out in her book and also that many of you talked about. And he falls into the camp of those who are interpreting the object of negation too broadly. So here are 5 quotes from Matilal that point this out. He says, Madhyamaka is critical of all other philosophical systems. The emptiness doctrine is critique
Why
of
is
all
that
views.
too broad?
Well, ask me after I finish this section.
Okay.
If anything, Madhyamaka critique is an attempt to show that it's neither proper nor is it strictly justifiable to regard any particular metaphysical system as absolutely valid. The Madhyamaka claims that emptiness is a critique of all views of reality, but not itself another view of reality. And emptiness should cure delusions originating from all sorts of views or positions. So, as Napper explains, while Madhyamaka do of course refute other systems, she points out that according to Tsongkhapa, it is not merely other systems that are being refuted, but rather it's the tenets of systems which are based on the assumption that if something exists, it must exist inherently. And she explains that the idea that other systems are based on assertions of inherent existence, articulated as such or not, is a justification for Nagarjuna's style of refutation. So what is being refuted then is tenets that are built on the logical consequence of an assertion of inherent existence. We've talked about that before in this class. So she also suggests that Madhyamakas would not refute systems which are not built on such an assertion. And also, it's clearly the case, I think, that Madhyamakas do articulate their own system as a positive path to meditative realization of the view of emptiness. And so Napper says that they do have views, and what's meant to be rejected is merely wrong views, and specifically views of inherent existence. So while Matilal is right in pointing out the therapeutic role of emptiness, it's not just that it cures delusions originating from all sorts of views, but only from those views that are based on a conception of inherent existence.
Is there any system that doesn't posit inherent existence?
I don't know, but I think she was just speculating if there were to be such a system.
So then Nagarjuna then must refute all systems, except hypothetically,
Yeah.
if there were one that was like us Madhyamakas.
Yeah. But I think there's still, you can't say that he refutes all systems without making that qualification.
Without making more.
without explaining maybe why, it happens to be that all systems are based on a conception of inherent existence, and so he happens to refute them all. But
So-
he's not just refuting systems because there are systems.
Does he refute everything put forth by those systems that assert inherent existence?
No, I think only the tenets that are built that are based on inherent existence.
So that means those systems that he refutes do have tenets that are not built on inherent existence.
I'm not sure. I suppose you could
Such
say
as?
somehow that.
Such as? What would Nagarjuna not refute?
I'm not sure. Statements that the Buddha might have made, or as interpreted. I'm not sure what tenets he wouldn't refute. But I had a sense that there would be some.
So would Nagarjuna refute the five aggregates?
The existence of five aggregates.
Hmm.
It would depend on who was positing them to be existent and in what way.
So his refutation is person-based. If he likes the person, I'm making a joke. If he likes the person, he doesn't refute. He doesn't like the person, same tenet, he does refute.
Well, it seems that way often.
Oh, really? So who are the ones he doesn't refute? That he likes?
The Buddha.
So what do you do with five aggregates? What do people say? Does Nagarjuna refute the five aggregates?
No.
Okay. The existence of five aggregates he accepts, according to Gelugpa exegesis. Yet, these
Depends.
scholars look through the 27 chapters of the Karikas, and they begin to think he's refuting everything, all of the Abhidhamma categories. So then what are these special... There's the tenet of inherent existence itself. So inherently existent aggregates he would refute.
Yes.
Right. But he doesn't refute the five aggregates.
Right.
Okay.
Well, it depends who was talking about the five aggregates.
Really?
I mean, wouldn't it
With
be
those
that-
qualifications? It
No.
still depends on the person. I see.
No, I mean, wouldn't it be that certain people would, he would say if that person was talking about the existence of the five aggregates, he was really talking about the inherent existence of the five aggregates.
Oh yeah, but we have already made this specification. The difference between five aggregates and inherently existent five aggregates. We've already made the specification. So you don't need to make the specification again. We're deciding for aggregates and inherently existent five aggregates. I'm not talking about the process of decision that somebody says this. It's just, does he refute five aggregates? No. Does he refute six consciousnesses? No. Does he refute inherently existent six consciousnesses? Yes. So then what are these tenets that specifically stem from asserting inherent existence that he does refute? Besides the tenet of inherent existence itself, which could be applied to anything, right? Could be applied to anything. Are there some tenets, you've used the term, that specifically stem from the assertion of inherent existence? So there's a refutation about path structure, that to realize such a level, as we were speaking last time, to have yogic direct perception of impermanence would be enough to have the path of seeing. Okay. But I'm talking about, are there some tenets that lower Buddhist systems assert that Nagarjuna Chandrakirti, this sort of tradition, that Gelugpas would say, are being put forward only because they assert inherent existence? These don't exist even conventionally. Evolve? Production from self, other. It's an interesting answers. You see, you're obviously not giving me the answer I'm looking for, but you're causing me to stop in my tracks and consider the wild answers you're coming up with.
But like the Vaibhashikas who says that indivisible particles.
Yes, that's the list. People start wanting to have some substantial thing, so they come up with indivisible, partless particles, okay? And this doesn't even exist conventionally. And,
Indivisible moment of consciousness.
okay, and everybody has to come up with one. I don't know if I could come up with 5. And Vijnana.
Sure.
Yeah, you know, we've just been talking about it, right? This is something that's posited due to asserting inherent existence, but it's not just the inherent existence of it that is being refuted. It itself is being refuted, right? You follow? Whereas on these other objects, it's merely their inherent existence. So it's not everything that the systems put forward. That people say that there are mothers and fathers and families, and you know, those things are all fine. But when you read Nagarjuna's Karikas and you see these Abhidhamma lists, and those are the lists of what exists. It seems to many people that he's just refuting everything. There isn't anything outside of those lists. And there isn't. Gilbert claims are that he's just refuting the inherent existence of those, and in some instances, he's refuting those very phenomena themselves. They don't even exist conventionally. Because they're only put forward by, you know, if you're positing God, if you're Hume, and you're positing God because you need somebody, you know, you have no external world, and you need somebody who knows everything, in order, you know, something exists only because somebody knows it, and you're positing God out of that reason, maybe that would serve as some, you know, you have to have some solid being that knows absolutely every single thing, otherwise you're going to have to admit that the tree falling in the forest that nobody's paying attention to, but of course the ants and birds are paying attention to that. But like inside a rock,
It doesn't exist.
there are some sentient beings apparently that appear from inside rocks. My teacher used to talk about things, Ngon Langdon used to talk about such things. So I said, well, if that's Seme Truba, what is the Sema that realizes the sentient being inside the rock? He said, oh, there's no fault, no fallacy. You know, there are special sorts of Dongdae and so forth who are like anywhere. Actually, I wasn't positing about the being inside the rock. I was positing about the molecule way inside the rock. I was talking about that. How do you posit that? What is the Tsema? And he said, oh, there are sentient beings everywhere. Even, you know, there are Dongdae and so forth that are everywhere. But there's even little animals that we can see that are produced inside rocks.
That's true.
So now he being pressed, but that's only in some places in rocks. It's not in all places in rocks.
Is he talking
Yeah.
about fossils?
What?
Is he talking about fossils?
I think he was talking about a live thing.
Bugs and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, when you pick up rocks.
I don't think it was fun.
Bacteria.
Well, then I'm getting led off on. So I'm admitting that these Galupa scholars, some of them are getting pushed, and they're having to come up with, you know, somebody's Tsema that realizes all of these things. So anyway, we got, what else can we come up with now that we're on to Alaya Vijnana? What else can you posit as something that a lower Buddhist system asserts that the Prasangikas say doesn't exist even conventionally?
Nirvana?
Nirvana, they say, exists.
Conventional.
Yeah. Nothing exists ultimately. That just means you can't find it
What
upon
about,
analysis.
Here's one, I don't know if it's one.
Nirvana is the true cessation of all afflictions.
Okay, but something I was reading for today, nirvana is also it's the cessation. It's the end of all conventional valid cognizers, which are necessarily
Oh,
Mistake?
a nirvana, which is the severance of the continuum of mind and body, that they say doesn't exist even conventionally. Yes.
But they would they refute the conventionally existent nirvana at all? Would they not accept that category from the Abhidharma origin?
Well, we just said that they say nirvana exists conventionally. So, what are you talking about?
I thought you were agreeing with him.
If he qualifies it by saying a nirvana, that is the severance of the continuum of mind and body. In other words, mind just stops, period. There's no further mind. That sort of nirvana is refuted, not a convention, not nirvana.
the nirvana posited by the lower schools.
The nirvana
Not specific.
posited by all lower schools?
Yeah, I knew I was going to get in trouble.
All right.
How many lower schools? No, only the non-Madhyamaka lower schools.
There's apparently, yes, and there's some suggestion by some Gelugpas that there are Chittamatrans who assert such a nirvana too. But there are others who say it couldn't be possible in a great vehicle system. So, I think in Tsongkhapa's list, he lists things like the pradhana, the prakriti of the Sankhya system. That's in this list of, these things are not asserted even conventionally. So you can't say, the conclusion out of this is that you cannot say, in Gelug, for instance, that they assert conventionally what the other systems assert in general or ultimately or whatever you want to say. You can't just say that they'll strip the tenet of inherent existence from it and say it exists, which is one thing we're learning from the 16 unique assertions. Right? So when we say, if he says the Madhyamaka is critical of all other philosophical systems, I think that's true. Just looking at it bald-facedly. Of course, the meaning that he reads into it may be entirely different. It doesn't say all systems. Okay, so that allows the Madhyamaka to have a system. And it says other, all. There's nobody who sets forth the Madhyamaka system. There's no one else. There's no one. There isn't. That's how they looked at it. And, you get into some Euro-American philosophies nowadays, and I think we'd find that on Gelugpa standards, they've fallen to one of the extremes. So now, what do you think he reads into the criticism of all other philosophical systems? Or doesn't he read into it everything they say? That the Madhyamaka is refuting everything they say. Yes. And so thus, with that understanding of his line, the Napra Gelugpas will differ.
Is the Gelugpa negation of these things, even conventionally, a Tibetan exegesis of the Madhyamaka stuff, or is there any Indian?
We're reading, in what we're reading on the 16 unique assertions, we're getting quotes from Chandrakirti. Nagarjuna, though, that's difficult. But it does seem that he accepts the four truths. Somebody says to him, you assert emptiness that makes the four truths impossible. And he says something like, for whom emptiness is possible, everything is possible. That makes the four truths possible. You're the ones we're not going to have the four truths. So it suggests he accepts the four truths. You got to scrounge around in that particular text to find what he does assert. He does say things that object and agent are established dependently. You scour around enough, you find a few positive assertions. It's interesting, this middle one. If anything, the Madhyamaka critique is an attempt to show that it is neither proper nor is it strictly justifiable to regard any particular metaphysical system as absolutely valid. What is a Napragilupa response to that?
Well, it depends. It was a little bit hard to understand this article sometimes because, I mean, it's a short article. I'm not sure exactly what he means by, say, metaphysical system. But in this case, I took him to mean, I might say that they would regard their own system as valid.
Yeah, and even as absolutely valid. Because absolutely here means correct through and through. Absolutely doesn't mean some turn-tom bar that in the face of this sort of analysis, it would be found, which absolutely could mean. It just means right and right, right through and through. The grand system. And as far as Gelupas are concerned, the Madhyamakas have the system of systems, the system supremus.
Having read this not recently, but a long time ago, the use of metaphysical system by people like Matilal and others is used to apply a system that have what they call speculative dogmatic views.
Mm-hmm.
So I doubt that he would say the Madhyamaka is a metaphysical system.
You doubt that of course,
So that
he says it isn't.
Yeah.
But Napper Gelupas?
I would say it's I wouldn't even use that language in that context.
Well, what does speculative mean? Here, according to Matilal. What do you think? I think it probably just means that just posit something as existing. Or at worst, to be metaphysical would be to posit a scheme for getting to nirvana, a scheme for getting out of liberation and attaining Buddhahood and paths and grounds and this and that. Wouldn't you think so? Metaphysical?
Probably a metaphysical system is anything that makes a positive assertion.
Yeah. So, and speculative. So it certainly would be. Good.
Do the Indians language connection?
Loud. They're over there. They're in this room. I'm talking this way. I'm still thinking of them over there. You're only thinking of the piece of paper in front of you. Yes.
Sir.
Don't hold back.
Do the Indians talk about the path structure on missions and that sort of thing very much? Could you argue that
Chandra Kirti wrote his Madhyamaka based on the 10 Bodhisattva grounds. There's a chapter for each ground. He tells what each ground is. And it's very important for us to talk this way, because even though you might have seen Chandrakirti's text and seen, at least like in Compassion in Tibetan Buddhism, that's what the first 5 grounds, you might have seen it, it really doesn't register. He's talking about Bodhisattva grounds. And therefore, here we have a speculative system, or a metaphysical system, or a system with a laid out path to Buddhahood. Yes? More?
that was essentially it? Just to, so we, without having to go to the Gelupas, we can say that
yes.
in India.
And this is part of the line of what we're looking at. What are the Napragilupas saying? And on both sides of this, what are the sources? What's Matilal's source? My God, you look at the Karikas and it looks as if nothing is. It looks as if everything is being refuted. So what mistake is he making if he thinks everything is being refuted? If Matilal thinks everything is being refuted, when Nagarjuna analyzes going, right, and doesn't find it, when he concludes that going doesn't exist, what's his mistake?
He's the chief of linguists.
Well, what's his mistake?
He thinks it doesn't exist even conventionally.
But why? What's the glue that makes him think that? Well, what the hell? It's being analyzed. It's not being found.
Production.
So it's the inherent existence of going that he's not finding. So what Tsongkhapa says, and it's most telling differentiation that he makes in Lamrim Chemo. Ma neva tan, never never. I don't know what he says, tade or different. Ma neva tan, never never. Not finding something, you would think means to find it to be non-existent, never never. If you're qualified, you see, if you're not qualified to find something, you know, like termites, and you're not qualified to find them, and you come in and don't find them, that doesn't constitute finding that they don't exist, okay? But if it's qualified and you don't find it, right? So now inherent existence, with respect to inherent existence, it's not found, and it's found to be non-existent. But the reason why Tsongkhapa is making this distinction is that you're looking for something like Publ. You're not finding it. But not finding it doesn't constitute finding it to be non-existent. Not finding it constitutes finding the non-existence of its inherent existence. Because that's what that analysis is qualified to look for. It's qualified to look for inherent existence. He's drawing the conclusion that this non-finding of the object, he didn't have the target to begin with, of the inherent existence, the findability or whatever of the object under analysis, or the existence of the object from its own side. And he hasn't seen that that's the target, and that's what's being affected when you do the search.
That's what I meant here, by saying the object of, he interprets the object of negation too broadly.
Yes. Okay.
Another thing that he does is sees Madhyamaka's absolutism, which we talked about with yours, Dave, I guess, with my team.
Yeah.
So he makes this following claim. He says, Madhyamaka refuses to believe in phenomenal plurality. Thus, his philosophic activity consists mainly in exposing the unjustifiability and therefore the unreality of the pluralistic order envisaged by our common experience and thought. Matilal tends to support a view of Madhyamaka as a kind of absolutism. He begins the article as above, citing rejection of plurality as the Madhyamaka's goal.
Double-sided.
No, his is not. Are you lost?
Yes. What happened to number 2? We disposed of
I'm
that.
reading it.
Oh. I didn't understand why you were turning the page.
Oh, mine is, yours is the only double-spaced copy I made.
Thank you. Yes.
Matilal begins the article as above,
Thank you.
citing rejection of plurality as Madhyamaka's goal, and ends the article with a call for a return home where the totality is revealed and we rest in a state of perfect freedom, joy, and bliss. And he seems here to be advocating a type of ultimate reality that is an absolutist's noumena underlying and disjunctively beyond the fragmentation of phenomena. Matilal calls the pluralistic order of the universe a convenient myth, and he even seems to suggest that it must be discarded when the totality is revealed. He also seems to side with Murti's equating of the ultimate and the consciousness apprehending the ultimate, when he writes, when the ultimate truth dawns in the mind, the emptiness doctrine does not appear as a separate doctrine or viewpoint. Both Newland and Napper accuse Matilal of absolutism, standpoint which contradicts the gyud claim that even emptiness exists only in a conventional, interdependent, and relative sense. If emptiness were an absolute, Newland writes, it would be, quote, independent of everything else and would have to be self-instituting, existing by way of its own nature, unquote. Napper notes that for Tsongkhapa, emptiness is not an absolute. He grants it the status of an existent, but does not reify it to anything more than that. Moreover, as Napper points out, emptiness is seen as multiple or pluralistic, for there are as many emptinesses as there are phenomena. Lastly, according to Gelug interpretations, it's not the case that pluralistic or the conventional are cancelled out by the ultimate, as Matilal seems to imply with the statements such as the indented quote above, as well as by the following statement, quote, when all delusions are cured by emptiness, emptiness vanishes into non-emptiness, samsara vanishes into nirvana, and vice versa.
Now, what would be your but? The but would be, but still in Gelug they say, on this question of the disjunctive, the absolutist noumenon underlying and disjunctively beyond the fragmentation of phenomena. You've decisively shown that the Napper and Newland, the NNN Gelugpas, don't assert this, right? But what do the Gelugpas assert that is like this? Do the Gelugpas assert something that is indeed like what Matilal says? Is there some part of their
emptiness?
Yes.
Emptiness and the consciousness perceiving like clear water pouring into clear water.
And what happens to all phenomena?
The appearance of them disappears.
Yeah. So it's like disjunctive, and it's a fragmentation in the sense that phenomena do exist, but they're not appearing. Emptiness does appear. All these things don't appear. And as you said, but. You see, she came right away with a but, and that's exactly the point. But in Gelugpa Buddhahood, the two are like so. And it's only due to a problem with the mind that the two aren't together. So it's actually not then fragmented. Yes, Buddhahood is only their trump card. You have to look at how they posit this extremely long period of the path and say that really is how they're viewing. But that's the ultimate vision. Buddhahood is
It's
that.
a matter of perspective.
Excuse me?
You say, well, it's a problem in the mind, which is why we don't see the conventional and the ultimate as
Yes.
one.
Yes.
Doesn't that imply
As one, I don't know about one, together, simultaneously. Yes.
simultaneously?
Isn't that?
Well, again,
You said, isn't that a problem of perspective?
it's making it kind of
Yes.
seem as if,
Yes.
you know,
Okay, what's your
all
trap?
differences-
Spring the trap. Yes, it's a problem of perspective.
well,
So?
but we say that the difference between ultimate truth and conventional truth isn't merely a matter of perspective.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that, but what does that have to do with the first topic? My first admission, that it's a problem of perspective. It just means a problem with your mind that you can't see both at the same time. Doesn't mean,
Again, well, the idea that
That
the
ultimate
two are
truth and
mutually
con-
exclusive would support this idea that there's a noumenon and phenomenon.
yes, okay. Yeah, I just want you to spell it out more. I think you're onto something. Noumenon and phenomenon. Good. Then?
Thirdly, Madhyamaka sees, or Matilal sees Madhyamakas as making no ontological commitments. He says that they try to maintain a non-committal attitude in ontology. And so my qualm there is with the choice of the word non-committal, because I think they are indeed committed to expressing an ontological view about the status of emptiness and the status of phenomena, but not as Matilal seems to explicate. Matilal seems to make this ontological distinction between plurality of phenomena and totality of the ultimate, but, and this is not something that I think, as we were just discussing, Madhyamakas would say, and yet they're certainly committed to their position. And Napper writes, emptiness is a final nature of phenomena, is, one might say, the substratum underlying phenomena, but is not ontologically distinct from them in the sense of having different status of existence. All things, emptiness and phenomena qualified by emptiness, are equally without inherent existence. So that's a small point. Fourth, I think in one point, Matilal confuses the basis of division of the two truths, saying here that a realist may be rather suspicious of bifurcations of truths into two levels. And so I just felt that he took the base of division for the two truths to be truths. And so, as we discussed before, also, Geluk's agree that the base of division is object of knowledge. But because in Newland seems to be a question that's that has been disputed, maybe that's why Matilal was not clear. Maybe it's something that's not really clear in the works of Nagarjuna that Matilal had looked at.
Oh, so Matilal is representing a traditional assertion. It's not. Yes.
And that maybe it didn't
Good point to make. Right?
question until the case.
Oh, yeah.
So, well, I guess more something and he also makes a statement saying that the character of the phenomenal world is thus declared to be neither real nor unreal, but logically indeterminable, which I think is a sort of an unclear thing to say, but he seems to think that they don't make any committed statements about the character or the nature of the phenomenal world.
Such as
But it's hard to say what he's really saying because he doesn't go into it.
Such as that this table is impermanent. I think really is his view. They say, I have nothing to say. As Gyur says. We've been, having marvelous good time reading Gyur, who holds as radical a position of silence as Gelukpa's hold of verbalization. As radical. He talks a lot about it.
Hundreds of pages.
It's delightful. I was just wondering if, we say marikwa lenge, innate ignorance. And what does innate mean? Maybe I'm jumping ahead. A priori, yes, I'm jumping on. But a priori is a translation of innate. Please.
So then I have 3 points that I thought were points of agreement between Matilal and Geluk as represented by Napper and Hopkins at UVA. First, Matilal says the Madhyamaka position is a conflict or contradiction between two propositions. One, an a priori assumption that things have own nature, svabhava, and two, an experience-derived proposition that all things are dependent arisings. And this is a small point, but I thought that here he seems to be in agreement with the Geluk position that the conception of inherent existence contradicts the common sense understanding of impermanence and change. Two, there's this quote here, he says, well, maybe you can just read this. He says, if the phenomenal world were a non-entity, all practical activities would be impossible, and even ethical and spiritual disciplines would lose their significance. And so this seems also to be sort of in agreement with something that Napper writes, where she says, the existence of emptiness makes possible the existence of everything else. And furthermore, religious practice and religious goal are possible and purposeful only if emptiness exists.
Does he say that? He says, realization of the ultimate truth comes about by way of the phenomenal world, so we must have it. He doesn't say that phenomenal world can only exist if emptiness exists. Does he? In what you quoted?
No, it's not quite the same. But
Okay. But
I just thought it was interesting
Yes.
because he doesn't seem to say, although it seemed earlier in the article like he was saying that we need to get rid of all
Yes.
existence, now he sort of comes back and seems to say that it has provisional existence.
And perhaps it's that necessary evil position, however, that you get to the ultimate by way of the
and
conventional,
discard the,
and then perhaps it's discarded. Who
it
knows?
seemed like that, but it's not.
This is again from Chandrakirti's line of Taptang, Tapjung. One is the method, and the other is what arises from the method.
And then,
As if the method is then disposable after you get to that which arises from the method.
If you look at Matilal's logically, it doesn't work. You say, if no conventional, then no ultimate. And then you turn it around, which is the counterpositive. If ultimate, then conventional. In other words, if the ultimate exists for Matilal, then the conventional has to exist. By his own reason.
Oh yeah.
And he's now in contradiction. Because he wants to hold that it only exists as means.
Hmm?
The ultimate doesn't really exist. That's not
so the last point I had to make is just that he does actually talk about the doctrines of two truths and emptiness as part of a religious system aimed at liberation, which some of the authors in this book that I glanced through didn't even mention.
So now, this is very well done. When you say, like in Matilal's favor, that means you have this, you're not doing Napper, Newland run on Gelu, but now you are deciding that we should see Madhyamaka as a religious system,
No,
and this guy's
actually,
got it right.
no. I mean, what I really meant was in Matilal's favor from the perspective of Gelu and dbyangs.
Okay, fine.
At least you got that right.
That's
How does he, if he says it's not a metaphysical system, how does he sort of justify that with it being a religious tradition aimed at liberation? I don't know, I mean, it's too hard a question, I don't know, but I'm just...
That's a very good question. And we should
I
answer.
don't know that, he doesn't say that it's not a metaphysical system.
Yes, that's right. I mean, exactly. How could he justify saying it's a religious system that leads to liberation unless he's going to admit it's a metaphysical system?
But I think he does say that it's a metaphysical system.
But he does say.
Yeah.
How could he? Without self-contradiction.
All right.
Because that's what we're saying metaphysical means. Yes, then. Very good.
Okay.
You're up.
Yeah, I have chapter 7, which is the non-assertion of autonomous syllogisms and self-consciousness.
God, you have the easy one. Yeah.
Okay. Basically, just he says autonomous reasons cannot be possible without finding something positable upon analyzing for the imputed object. Self-consciousness also does not exist because if one also analyzes for the imputed object consciousness, there is no mode of analysis more obvious than this to be ultimate.
We should have posited that as one of our types of phenomena that are asserted only because the system asserts inherent existence. Self-consciousness. Self-consciousness. Please.
Yeah. He doesn't talk much about the non-assertion of autonomous syllogisms, although he does say in this chapter. He does say that these two assertions are something unique to the consequent school. And also that this is where the division between the autonomous and the consequentialists arrives. And I was thinking I guess it's because, that many of this, maybe the autonomous school is one that regards the entities and the autonomous syllogisms to be inherently existent.
Yes.
Is that
To put it
inherently established?
yeah, that's, in a rough way, fine. In all of the other systems, for a for anybody, in anybody's system, for a syllogism to work, the subject and so forth must be established. I mean, you can't be talking about crazy things that just aren't, that there's no consciousness to certify that they exist. And so in the non-prasangika systems, they say that these elements of the syllogism, the consciousness that certifies these elements of the syllogism as existing, also certifies their inherent existence. It's a very carefully worded summation. Yes?
Okay.
Much like yours.
Okay, then he goes into the self-consciousness, why it's not asserted. I quoted Nagarjuna's refutation of objects says, valid cognition is not established by itself, neither mutually, nor by other valid cognition, nor by its object of comprehension, nor causelessly. Now, I did put that Cozort's note that the here means, the other here means another, inherently other. Okay, and self here means also like own entity, also inherently established. When you say self-consciousness, it's a synonym of being inherently established self-consciousness.
What is?
When you say self-consciousness, is it an inherently established consciousness?
No. Let's see, maybe I can get it just by talking. Which means watch out. If you're hung up on the findability of objects, in order to certify the validity of the consciousness, you're going to have to posit that it knows itself while it knows its object. Therefore, stemming from your assertion on inherent existence, you assert that the consciousness knows itself while it knows its object. Okay? So the word self in self-consciousness doesn't mean inherent existence.
Aren't they asserting that it means that the first consciousness must be inherently existent in order to realize that second?
No.
Okay. That's a mistake. Okay. Then Navon Bden quotes Tsongkhapa's Illumination of Thought. It says, it is by reason of the fact that it is self-conscious, that if self-consciousness were asserted, it would be necessary to assert that it is able to bear analysis of reason, reasoning consciousness, searching for the imputed object. Now, again, here is this analysis they're talking about ultimate analysis.
Right.
So that's why, again, inherently existent. And from the same text, it is not feasible that a consciousness apprehends that same consciousness because it is contradictory that its activity operates on itself.
I'm laughing at even well-trained gymnasts are unable to mount their own shoulders. Because you do get pictures of Indians who do this. Just their feet come up here, right? But I don't know if they mount. Please.
Okay. He goes into this other example. If a butter lamp illumines itself and other things, there's no doubt the darkness also would obscure itself and other things. Something should expand.
That's fun, isn't it? Darkness obscuring itself so you couldn't see darkness. But doesn't a lamp, like this lamp, lights these things, right? And doesn't it light itself so that we can see it? Yeah. He's trying to draw me out when he said yes. I just said, yeah, okay. Then object and agent are the same, right? Okay. So then self-consciousness is possible.
Okay.
The real as Kizun Sambo said, Shantideva, who's a Nyingma, Shantideva does not assert self-consciousness. Too bad. And this comes out, tough luck for him. Because this ultimate wisdom is often called Cozort Rangrik. Rangrik, you see, knowing itself individual. I don't know what the individual is. Knowing itself. And this language of Rangrik referring to realization of the ultimate, I think comes out of the psychology of the experience, the feeling tone of the experience. It is, the mind knowing itself. I mean, that's the feeling tone of it. And thus, too bad if he doesn't, it's tough luck for him. And I've often thought with this very tough put down of something, of the object and agent being one, acting on itself, if people wouldn't be cutting themselves out of certain types of experiences that you can say that are described more metaphorically or whatever, in a different type of rhetoric. Yes. And you'd be cutting yourself out of that experience. Like, as soon as it's beginning to happen, I couldn't have this because it doesn't exist.
Actually, in the Nyingma, isn't there
But
an example?
Cozort Rangrik is not only Nyingma, it's Gelug. Gelug has to explain it away. And I'll have to think about how they explain it away.
So saying, I think in the Nyingma, there's also an example of the body lamp doing exactly what they say they not do, that it does illumine itself and others.
Yes.
They use the same example.
Yes, and I think that's what the experience of a very profound state is like. And thus they use this terminology. But then it gets carried over, perhaps by other people, too far. I don't know. Just want to bring it up. Yes?
Okay, Jam-dbyangs-bzhad-pa expands and it says it would absurdly follow that even darkness, upon being obscured by itself, does not appear. Also, there is no need for an illuminator of the body lamp other than the body lamp itself, because darkness does not exist in it.
That's lovely. Isn't it also on the other side of the coin? That's really cute.
It goes into
What need does it have to illuminate itself? There's no darkness in it. Otherwise, there's darkness in the room, right? That it has to get rid of.
yeah, that's
It's
what
lovely.
they come to. If they meet or they don't meet, if darkness meets with the light, or the other points they do. So he goes, a body lamp neither clears away darkness that it meets, nor clears away darkness that it doesn't meet.
That's, to me, that's from a different context. But anyway, please go on.
Okay, because just as a body lamp itself does not illuminate itself, but nevertheless it's having luminosity, it's not precluded. So I think that's important. Because so even though consciousness itself does not experience itself in the manner asserted by those who hold the contrary position, that it has mere experience is not precluded. So it does have the experience of itself.
But what I'm getting at is like luminosity is knowing its own luminosity in these experiences. It's not just luminosity being luminosity, but this extremely strong sense of knowing its own luminosity. Yes.
Okay.
Fine, that's it. Okay. Next. Yes.
Pratyakṣa and true cessations. These are the 2 points of this chapter. One, that pratyakṣa refers to objects and not to subjects. This first quote sort of explains this, that pratyakṣa, as it's translated into Tibetan, is translated 2 different ways. Sometimes as mngon and sometimes as gyur, and that there are problems with that. And then the second point is true cessations are the element of a superior's qualities, therefore all superiors realize emptiness. And the way Cozort's chapter unfolds, he uses both Jam-dbyangs-bzhad-pa and non-assertion. And on the first point, they express different interpretations, and on the second one, they appear to be in accord with one another. The Sanskrit translation equivalent of mngon pratyakṣa was used for both mngon, which often refers to a directly perceiving consciousness, and gyur, manifest phenomena, synonymous with manifest object. It is asserted that the pot is the actual pratyakṣa, and that the term pratyakṣa is used imputedly with respect to the direct perceiving sense consciousness. So the distinction here is between the gyur as the actual pratyakṣa and mngon as an imputed use of the term pratyakṣa. Now bden differs on this. He thinks that not only is pratyakṣa is not only restricted to sense objects, which would have excluded consciousnesses, but that all phenomena are pratyakṣa to awarenesses that clearly, i.e. directly realize them. This would imply that for knowing bden, even permanent phenomena such as an emptiness can be considered a pratyakṣa in relation to the wisdom consciousness of meditative equipoise directly realizing it.
What's the etymology of pratyakṣa? Do you know? Pratyakṣa.
Anyone given in this is before the eyes.
Yes, before the eyes. Therefore, if you have a term that means before the eyes, doesn't it mainly refer to objects? And this is a common sense reading on the term pratyakṣa, which is being used again by Chandrakirti to go slap slap, because Tignaga Dhammakirti are talking so much about pratyakṣa, and it only refers to consciousnesses, as you are familiar with it. Ngusum refers to a consciousness, and it's not the difference between ngusum and gyur. Ngusum itself. We're talking about ngusum itself, and therefore ngusum, it's evident, it's before the eyes, mainly refers to objects he's claiming. But even we who have done Lorik will say, oh yeah, ngusum is just a consciousness. That's just because we're too used to the word ngusum or pratyakṣa, thinking of it that way. So he's calling attention to the fact that in common parlance, in the etymology, that's what it means, pratyakṣa, something that's before the eyes. And so it's secondarily that it comes to mean these consciousnesses that directly perceive objects. Okay? And any object would be pratyakṣa to a certain type of consciousness, if that consciousness can directly perceive it. But then there's some debate that ngusum then mainly should just mean objects of the senses. You can see why somebody would say that.
Does he call it a question the mental sense or what?
Let's not get into that. Now, on your quote about, wasn't it yours, feeling as mental direct perception? There's a phrase in Chandrakirti that suggests that the feeling that accompanies a mental consciousness, and thus, and what he's talking about is a conceptual mental consciousness, is a mental direct perception. And once it's a feeling that accompanies a conceptual consciousness, the feeling also must be conceptual. That may not help at all. Okay, please.
And then the second theme is about true cessations. And Jam-dbyangs-bzhad-pa says, it is bolstering the consequentialist tenet that liberation depends upon realizations of emptiness. Since true cessations are emptinesses, and superiors necessarily realize true cessations, they must perforce realize emptiness.
That's very well said. It's very well said. That's just the point. Bolster. Good. So we'll start with Cozort.
Chapter 10 is the last one.
And chapter 10, who's doing 11?
9 and 10.
9 and 10. We have 2 to do.
Nobody's doing it.
No one's doing 11. I'll do 11. If I remember. And we have the chapters on meditation on emptiness to begin and write and finish that week